of a healed tumor. So it was not a technology or travel or urbanization or the expansion of economy or the development, but an act of care that brought society together. A healed femur was a sign that a person has suffered injury and yet survived because another person took care of them. So today we will be discussing care work. Care work is the labor that goes into producing and sustaining life, whether direct or indirect care. Yes, Matt? Okay. So domestic workers around the world perform care duties, and they frequently find themselves covering jobs of direct and indirect care. In many regions, these tasks are indistinguishable from tasks performed by care workers who are part of other infrastructures that are more formalized. But no matter how central the contribution of domestic workers is to care, they remain unrecognized, underpaid, and frequently part of the informal economy. It is time this changed. So today, as we celebrate the Global Day of Action on Care, we will explore how does the International Labour Organization's 5R framework on decent care work relate to our sector. We will explore what does it mean to recognize, reduce, redistribute, reward, and represent domestic workers in the care agenda. Today we have 5 speakers, 5 Rs, 5 regions who will provide us with the answers. Before we start our panel, please join me in welcoming our Vice President, a lawyer, and union leader of UPAC, Carmen Brides, for the opening address. Carmen, the floor is yours.
Hola, muchas gracias, Rula. Buenos días, buenas tardes, buenas noches. Qué alegría verla.
Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, Rula and everyone. It's so nice to see you, despite the fact that it's a Sunday and it's a day to rest. I do want to thank everyone on behalf of our federation and our president, Myrtle, who cannot be with us, but she's with us in our hearts. She's undergoing her disease, and we do want to pray for her so that we can send her all our good wishes for a soon recovery. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all the domestic workers and all the organizations that are joining us in this webinar today. As a federation, we ourselves started working in a very intense manner. And I remember, and Elizabeth can probably remind all of us as well, back of on 2017 in Neon, where we attended this event on care work. And we were looked upon as something weird. There were different activities, different sectors being part of this event, and we were not even considered as care workers. How can a domestic work if we are the ones who care for people? We are in the health industry, we went to university, we work in daycares and preschools. And what they didn't realize back then is that domestic work was also care work. And that's how our fight started. We actually had started before then together with other organizations in care work, but then we would start working on educational material for workers so that we could prove what exactly was direct work, indirect work, institutional work of private households, paid work, unpaid work, because in this sector of domestic work, we do both tasks. And that is how important our work is. We have paid care work that sometimes we do on an everyday basis within our work environment, and the unpaid work that we also do. For us, This is something that was significant. It was a milestone because all regions started working together so that our governments, our peers, different unions, different organizations could place within their agendas domestic work and care work as well. And that was very important for us. From that point forward, we started to see campaigns such as many Latin Americans and other regions. This campaign that was called Care for Those Who Care for You. And this was a starting point, I would say, for this type of advocacy work, and particularly within the pandemic. This is where we created more awareness on domestic work and care work, because most countries, I would say every country, witnessed domestic workers as essential workers. And that is something that helped us to make this more visible. Domestic work was care work as well. We also created this geopolitical mapping of how this evolved in Asia and in other continents. We did lobby, and many of our comrades back from the beginning of the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, we all started, and the pandemic did not stop us. So we also created a toolkit that was fundamental for workers, for civil society, to put a stop to this lack of visibility on our work. There were two conditions that were very important for us, and that was women economic empowerment and how the percentage of care work was being developed by women. It does seem that care work belongs to women and not to men. And this issue of putting the highest burden on women without having contribution from the other gender to continue working in this care work. It was very difficult for us to put this topic into our agenda and to show this economic empowerment of women. And not just that, but also including the academia, universities, unions, so that they could join this movement that was so important for us. We also would like to highlight that our comrade from Brazil, Ms. Dos Santos, was for us such of a good participation within the World Bank on children care that ashamed all comrades that were participating at that event. And we would like to congratulate our comrade from Brazil, because she was so clear in her presentation and care work was so clearly defined, because she explained that without domestic workers, people and employers could not develop themselves if we're not within their households supporting their work through our tasks. But it's very important to differentiate paid and non-paid domestic work. What we do with this service, with these tasks, is that every country should give social protection, social security, and recognition of our rights through our C-189 and our national legislation. And this is what is not complied with within our sector. We have this massive fight beyond the ratifications of the conventions, and this is work for countries to continue this ratification and exercise this ratification of C-89 in those countries where this has not happened yet. It is very important for us to continue putting domestic work and care work in the forefront of the agendas and change this mentality that we are not care workers. Next year, actually in 2024, where within the ILO, this topic of care work will be in the forefront of their agenda. And that's what we have to reinforce our concept of domestic workers. So I'd like to invite you all to continue working on care work, but also remembering that we need to continue ratifying our Conventions 189. This is the pillar of all our fight for our legislation to continue including ourselves in Social Security. There were many changes, and we continue to see many changes that do not quite reach what we actually need, but we're always one step closer when we take these actions. And we would like to then continue working on care work. We would like to continue making our voices heard. And we would like to have our rights recognized. We are domestic workers and we would like to enjoy our rights. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Carmen, for such a powerful opening speech. Indeed, the battle also involves changing the parameters and the mentalities of the inclusion and exclusion of domestic workers within the care work agenda and the definitions of this framework. And this is a fight that domestic workers have picked up. Like Carmen has mentioned, over 3 years ago, the campaign Cuida a quien te cuida, or care for those who care for you, was one step towards the establishment of this shift in the mentality, because the differences frequently between care workers and domestic workers are class-based. So it is a difference based on inequalities and not necessarily on skills. So we do require a skills recognition system for domestic workers that would put them on the agenda. Therefore, the first R that we will be discussing is to recognize domestic workers as part of this agenda. And for this first R, please join me in welcoming Maria Cotal, who is the president of the Federation of Unions of Domestic Workers of Chile. She is a woman, mother, daughter, granddaughter, trade unionist, and social leader in the fight of the labor rights. Her advocacy work includes this campaign we just mentioned, and she has been working herself as a domestic worker for the same family for over 30 years. Welcome, Maria. The floor is yours.
Hola, buenos días. Buenas
Hello
tardes.
and good morning, good afternoon, good evening for some of you, to all of you. I'm not sure if there's some men in the room. Today, I was invited to present in this panel to share with you how it was that we managed for the state to recognize us as workers and as contributors to the national economy. We started this process out of instinct back in 2008. Maybe tired of being excluded, being discriminated from our law as domestic workers ourselves. We didn't have minimum wage, set working hours, or training certification to be considered domestic worker in its full extension and meaning. We started, as I said, this fight out of instinct due to a need for justice. It was a long road. We knocked on many doors. And finally, in 2011, and protected by the Ministry of Women and the foundation called Prodemos, we started talking with the administration. Back then, we received an assignment of tasks. We did everything we were asked to do. We conducted more than 1,000 surveys, walking by hand, one by one, and we worked with a consulting firm hired by the state. And in November of 2012, together with this consulting firm, and the Ministry of Women as well. We provided the government back then all these results where we identified 5 units of profiles of domestic workers. That administration, that government reviewed these results and accepted these profiles. And so since 2012, we continue to pave the way. We already managed for the state to acknowledge us and recognize us as workers, but also we had to fight for resources. We need financing, of course, for this type of activities. So a few years later, we obtained these resources and we started with the planning process. Unfortunately, there's always blocks on the way. And despite this, we are stubborn. We have a clear goal. And even within the pandemic, we could execute this program, even despite the difficulties. And today, in 2022, the first group of comrades was certified, 81 of them that could overcome every obstacle. It's a pilot program that was considered for or aimed at 300 workers initially. But since this process started last year and within the pandemic, we didn't receive certifiers or the workers. So these 80 women, against the pandemic, against every challenge, managed to reach the finish line. Maybe for the rest of other workers, this is just a proceeding. The state certifies, the workers register themselves, but for us, this is very important. It was not easy. And for us, this is just the beginning. It's the starting point. It's the first action that opens the door to making our work professional. The services that we provide and through which we were systematically exploited through long hours, excess of tasks and responsibilities as well, that in many cases are not inherent to domestic work itself, but employers, household owners give us responsibilities of care, protection, and safety of their children, even when they are present at home, particularly when we work within this household. We are somehow becoming slaves, and we want to finish with this system of exploitation. This is, again, as I said, a first step, a starting point, and we are particularly excited. For some of the sectors, might be nothing, but for us, this is the key that opens a new future for us. The Ministry of Women back then played a key role. Many meetings, always supporting, as well as the Prodemos Foundation that promotes. I apologize for my voice. I have a bit of a cold, but this foundation promotes the development of women. And as I said, we received their support and the support of other women that feel for us. They're enthusiastic. They feel empathy for us. And these results might help comrades from other countries that are in the same situation as we were, that they're not recognized and that they do not receive a license that says domestic workers. We have a document. I'm showing this on my screen. It does not cover it all, but it does cover step by step how the system had to take part of this regularization that would otherwise leave us out of the law that regulates the certification of our tasks had to be intervened so that we could be part of it. And our problem is universal, I believe. Most workers around the world, most domestic workers are employed by employers who are not well organized. And in Chile, for a worker to be certified, used to belong to a company, a corporation that had a certain number of staff that could receive this benefit, quote unquote. And as domestic workers, our employers only had one employee. So we had to change that system for us to be able to access these benefits. And to tell you the truth, we do not know rules, the stories, or the dynamics of different countries and different comrades. But if our experience might be useful for you, and you think that this document might be helpful for you so that you can grasp the idea, understand the training, the certification systems that might be able to change the systems in your countries, we will be happy to share this, support you, disseminate the message, and share the achievement. Doesn't matter if you're in Asia, in Africa, on the other side of the continent. The strength goes back and forth so that we can meet at some point where we can all move forward together to dignify our work, to make our work more valuable. So, dear comrades, this is really the summary of what we did. This is a fight of 14 years in our lives that really led us to this point in time where, through a very emotional ceremony, maybe not as fancy, but very emotional ceremony, we could create this space for our certification. 14 years of our lives and 14 years of insisting, of resisting to overcome the system. Thank you very much for this time, for letting me share these actions, which led to a very significant result in our sector.
Thank you so much, Maria, for sharing with us. I see claps around the room for such energy and inspiring work. And indeed, down with the system of exploitation everywhere across the ocean. The domestic workers movement is united and is learning from one another's experiences. So we learned about the Chilean experience in getting a recognition for over 80 workers in terms of their skill sets acquired over years as the fruit of a struggle of 14 years. And it was very powerful also to hear about how the care duties extend on a continuum from unpaid care to the paid care work. And while domestic workers are caring for the employer's children, who cares for them, for their own children? For our next speaker, that was part of the questions that would be addressed. Maureen, our next speaker, is a Kenyan domestic worker, single mother of one. She has migrated to Qatar for a better life in March of 2019, where she has worked as a domestic and care worker. In 2020, she joined the Kenyan Domestic Workers Organization when she works in partnership with the Embassy of Kenya in Qatar, the Ministry of Labor, and other local governmental agencies to create a better environment for domestic workers. Maureen Mbogo will talk to us about what does it mean to redistribute care work, specifically coming from a migration perspective. How is care work being distributed? What are the gaps? How should we define our second R in this care agenda? Maureen, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good day to you all, my sisters. My name is Maureen Mbogo, and it's an honor to be with you today. Let's start off with a bit of background on the status health care facilities for persons with disabilities or special needs. This country has all the state-of-the-art facilities, either state-owned and non-profit private organization, from rehabilitation, therapies, educational, physiological services are open for both nationals and expatriates. However, my patient have never sought assistance from any of these institutions. It was his parents' decision, because once I asked them, why are they forcing me to do the caregiving job, yet I came as a domestic worker? But the answer was, our house, our rule. We brought you here to do what we tell you to do. The boy's condition, however, was never explained to me. The parent just told me he was born like that. This caregiver job was not made known to me prior to my transfer to this family. Due to fear and being desperate for nowhere to seek help at that time, I had no other option than to accept and do both work without additional pay. Care labor is often displaced onto female domestic workers. That is what happened to me, mainly because of economic impact to the family. The wage of licensed caregiver is twice or even thrice the rate of the domestic workers, and they don't even give extra pay. In short, they are saving a lot of money, and this fuels the kafala even more. Invest of intimidation, pay less at the expense of the domestic workers. The healthcare arrangements at home, in my opinion, depend on the medical condition of the patient and financial capacity of the family. My day starts picking up my patient, who was 21 years old boy by that time, and he needs support from bed to his wheelchair, and take him to washroom to refresh him, serve him breakfast, and ensure he's comfortable before I start with household duties. Yeah, the cleaning, cooking, ironing, grocery, sometimes. At lunchtime, I have to feed my patient, clean him up, and make sure he takes a nap, then do some work again. In afternoon, bath time for him, and take him to his play area, the PlayStation or the TV shows, as those are the things he could only do. Evening comes, I give him dinner, get him ready for the bedtime. He has no medication or therapy management that I know of. This routine changes, of course, if he's unwell. His parents are not involved in his daily care at all, unless he needed to be taken to the hospital. At this situation, they don't need my help. Let me walk you through the medical care assessment for domestic workers. In my first year of work, I did not have health card. If I get sick, I was just given a Panadol only, and I told to continue with work and keep on moving. I'll be fine. If it gets worse, I had to take myself to the hospital, which was around 300 meters away. I pay from my pocket and ask for reimbursement. It was only in my second year that I finally got my health card. I consider myself still lucky to have a health card in my second year. There are so many Kenyan domestic workers that do not have health card, 2 out of 10, and even if they have health card, some are not allowed to go out and seek medical assistance unless they call ambulance in life-threatening situation, especially during the pandemic. I have a 15-year-old son that is in a boarding school and a private medical insurance. If he gets sick while in school, the matron will take him to a private hospital, and while at home, my brother cared for him. Healthcare insurance is expensive in my home country. Not too many people can afford it, but the Kenyan government has improved insurance scheme called NHIF, National Hospital Insurance Fund, and the immigrant workers can consider for their families. As a mother, I know I speak on behalf of millions of migrant workers, domestic workers, who are mothers. It is heartbreaking my heart that we look after someone else's child, and we can't care for our own. But I have to remain objective and strong to be able to support my family and myself. Thank you all so much for listening and for letting me take this conversation. Solidarity to you all.
Thank you, Maureen. Solidarity to you, and very important links that you have shown us about how the government of a receiving country displaces all of this healthcare duties onto you, an individual migrant domestic worker in a household who does direct care for a person with a disability alongside the other domestic work, while you do not have access to local healthcare, and while your child back home also has restricted healthcare access that you need to pay for out of pocket. So while domestic workers pick up all this work, we need to think about a distribution of care that is equitable, that is fair, and that works for domestic workers. Thank you for all of these insights. We will be moving to our next speaker, who will also shed light on the third R, that is to reduce the care labor burdens on domestic workers. What does it mean for us to be incorporated into this agenda? Our next speaker is Hirmawati. She is a migrant domestic worker from Indonesia who is currently working in Hong Kong for the past 3 years and was previously working in Taiwan. So she has an extensive experience being a migrant worker in various contexts. She is the vice president of the Union of United Domestic Workers, an affiliate of FADU, the Hong Kong Federation of Asian Domestic Worker Unions. Hermawati will talk to us about the extensive work hours that domestic workers put into the care labor and what needs to be done. The floor is yours. I can see you have unmuted. If we can pin you on the screen.
Oh.
There.
Good evening, everyone. Greetings to you all. May you always be in the protection of God. My name is Hermawati. I've been working in Hong Kong for 3 years now. I'm from Indonesia. I will raise the issue about a long working hour in Hong Kong. Because in Hong Kong, the working hour is more than 16 hours. Start from 6 a.m. in the morning until 12 midnight, and sometimes even more, or until 3 a.m. And after that, we still have to get up at 6 a.m. So you can imagine how long we can only take a rest. And also our food share is inadequate because employer do not provide the food share. Not only the food share, even for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, they only give the head of the fish that has no meat. Don't even think about vegetables, only the fish head and a small portion of the rice. And sometimes only be given steam bun that which have the very small size. We work more than 16 hours then, and we are not given the rest time, even just to eat and for have breakfast or lunch, we don't even have the chance. In Hong Kong is very sad of the working condition. Besides that, the accommodation like a bed, because it's not provided by the employer because the house is small. So that the migrant workers have to sleep in the kitchen, even on top of the stove, just be given like a flat board to sleep on top of the stove, and sometimes sleep on the sofa in front of the TV, and even have some of them sleep in front of the bathroom. And most of the time, the violence happen physically and also verbally. Physical violence mostly done either by the children of the employer and also elderly. It sometimes hit the migrant worker. Even when we report to the employer that we are being hit, but the employer doesn't even care. Employer will not care. And even though we report to the police, we do the authority, we don't even know where to report, because until now, we still cannot help our friends who face the violence to receive the justice when they got hit by the employer or the children, even though with a strong evidence, because we will still lose. Verbal violence, it's a everyday things that happen for the domestic workers, the migrant domestic workers in Hong Kong. I see that my friends was scolded by the employer out of the public place, and we cannot do anything about it. And also about health insurance is not adequate. Even though it is said there is health insurance, but we still have to use our own money even when we are sick. We have to record or do the video so that there is some people might be able to help the domestic workers who are sick, because even though we have a health insurance, but actually it's not guaranteed that will be taken care of. And the most important that I want to address is, beside the long hour, it's about the salary. The salary, the employer like to postpone our salary. When the worker said, "Ma'am, it's time to pay my salary today," but the employer like suddenly forget. I can say that the employer like suddenly amnesia. They don't, when we work, we cannot be late, we cannot be careless. Everything has to be perfect. We cannot do any mistakes. But when we ask for our rights, they seems like they forget. I'm hoping that the government, Hong Kong government, will give the regulation, will give strict regulation on the regulation they have stated, but is not implemented by the employer. Migrant workers in Hong Kong always being disadvantaged. So everything happened that is always bind to the domestic workers. It's happen most of the time, especially for the migrant domestic workers, and also employment contract that is breached during the interview. We do not want more. We just want the government to give our rights, accommodation for us to take rest, adequate food, and also day off rights. And government will act strictly to the employer who breach the regulation, not only being strict with the workers. That's all from me. Thank you for the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Hermawati. And if you could turn on your camera so we can just tell you a quick hello. I know that your internet quality is good today. So yeah, just to see you very quickly so we can associate these powerful words with the face. It was very important for us also to make the connections that you mentioned between the, for example, domestic workers doing food rationing within the household, but not being able to access food themselves. I know that a lot of recruitment agencies or in a lot of migration contexts, an employer even asks for a domestic worker that is thin, so she doesn't eat much, but that is not too thin, so she can work hard. And so she can work the 12 and 16 hours that you have described within your intervention. So thank you for that portrayal of the landscape of what is going on in Hong Kong. And we truly hope that the work hours are reduced, that the rest day is granted, that these basic rights that should be entitlements of domestic workers are very strongly explicit, heard, and implemented in your context and everywhere else. Thank you. Moving to our next panelist, she is Nelly Dina Kahua, who is from Namibia. She is the Secretary General of the Namibia Domestic Workers Union, and she oversees the strategic implementation of the trade union activities and negotiations on union projects with donors, stakeholders, and conducts capacity building trainings for domestic workers. Nelly will speak to us about the fourth R, which is to reward. So how do we envision rewarding the work of domestic workers within a decent care work framework? Nelly, the floor is yours.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you to the leadership of IDWF. Thank you, Comrade Carmen, for the great opening remarks that you've given us and giving us hope to pray for our president. I have 8 slides of presentation that I need to represent in terms of a care workers reward towards. Yeah, can you hear me, Laura? Okay.
Yes, Nelly, we can hear you. Matt, if you can mute everyone else, it would be.
Okay, thank you very much. The next slide. Laura, can you share my next slide?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. We're looking into the care workers of domestic workers and their skill reward. We were looking at many countries have no national living or minimum wage. It's very rare in Africa for the majority of countries that been covered in terms of the International Labour Conventions regarding the minimum wage. Convention 131, which is actually 1997, Regular Pay and Wage Protection Convention of 95, and then the Namibian has not ratified some of the conventions, but at least we managed to ratify the Decent Work Convention, which is 189 for domestic workers, which is ratified in 2020 on the 8th of December. The implementation took place already last year. So
Nelly, you're muted. Can you unmute yourself?
sorry, Laura, my apology for the audios. No, let me quickly go through the minimum wage, which is not covered in terms of most of the African countries. Yeah. We were looking at the international conventions where minimum wage convention 131, and then in the regulations pay the regular pay and wage protection convention 95. Namibian has not ratified some of these conventions, but at least we managed to ratify Convention 189, the decent work for domestic workers in Namibia. That was ratified in 2020 on the 8th of December. Summary of the provision under the International Labour Convention. We were looking at the minimum wage that must be covered. The living expenses of the employees and his family. There was a basket research that was done by the Labour Research Center in Namibia, which is a basket regarding domestic workers that maximum that can cover about 10,000 Namibian dollars. Moreover, it must be related reasonable by the general level of wages earned by the living of other social groups. Wages must be paid regularly on a daily or weekly, fortnight or monthly basis. Laura, can you go forward, Laura?
Go ahead.
The next one. Thank you very much. Minimum wage is regulated under the Labour Act of 11 of 2007 in Namibia, under the Minister of Labour responsibility and Wage Commissioner responsibility, where the majority, some of the employers and employees tripartite body go on to these two boards and decide what is the current of the basic minimum wage for domestic workers. The minimum wage for domestic workers was first implemented in 2015 after a long journey where DAWU is still in existence for 32 years. So after these 32 years, it's hardly now when we talk about the current positions that we are having now in negotiation of this minimum wage. As a domestic workers, me myself, we were negotiated from 2008 to try to see what is the basic of the minimum wage that domestic workers can get. Fortunately, by then there was no representative at the board for domestic workers. There was no leadership. The leadership that was there, it was dormant, it was male counterpart. Domestic workers was not well represented. So it was a shock for us that 45% of approximately 46,000 domestic workers in Namibia were earning below 600 per month, which is NAD. The first over a monthly minimum wage was set. It was 1.28. It's also in NAD. After the 1st of October 2018, it increased by 1% according to the inflation. When we are looking at the inflation, we are looking at the living expenses of domestic workers, the household expenses, rental fees, food, petrol, taxi allowance that was also excluded out of this minimum wage. at this junction, look at the implementation in 2015. So it took the government exactly 3 years to give domestic workers the next increasement, where the minimum wage, the wage order of domestic workers stated that after every annual year on the 1st of April, the minimum wage must increase. So at the end of the day, from my point of view and experience that I'm facing currently of domestic workers, I think government somehow, they are also ignorance in looking on the conditions of domestic workers and in the implementation. So the result, some of the employers could not afford minimum wage, so they reduced the working days of domestic workers and hourly. This is a reality of the minimum wage in Namibia. Next slide, Laura. Labor Act of 2007 stipulated ordinary hours per week, which is 45 hours that domestic workers have to work per day in a monthly. So if the employees work 5 days or less, daily working hours cannot exceed nine hours. So which is also including 6 days, no more than 8 hours. And an employer cannot ask an employee to do overtime unless otherwise agreed and in writing, because currently domestic workers, they are having a standard employment contract. And overtime must not exceed 10 hours a week. It have to be a maximum of 3 hours per day that a domestic workers must work. So the wage order is very clear, but the ignorance of the employers to adhere to these regulations is very high in Namibia. The rates, when we are looking at the rates, 150% of employee hours basic wage for domestic workers overtime is not even paid. 200% minimum of holidays, they are also not paid. So the overtime is in compensation is very ignorant, although the laws is implemented and is stipulated in the Labor Act. It's very clear. Next slide, Laura. Let me quickly continue and looking at how to perform many tasks of but paid for. A few and undermine at that point in view. Employers dismiss those working minimum wage and replace them by those who can work for less money. So which is now the challenges that when you check regulations are put in place, employers, they don't want to pay the current minimum wage. They want to stick to the lower minimum wage that they normally used to pay for the past 25 years while the union was in existence. So live-in domestic workers, they are receive the lunch hour of payment, a lunch sum of share of payment in kind, such as both living conditions are frankly poor, because they are requested to provide accommodation, a proper sanitation toilet for domestic workers. They are also allowed to bring visitors, but at the current moment, this is not even happening and it does not take place at all. The day of usually begins at 5, most of the domestic workers in the early morning hours, and then they go very late to bed at night, where they're also taking care of the families and looking after the elders in that house. So domestic workers normally for those who are live-in, they don't have really time to rest, and for them to take off is also difficult for employer to allow them to go and visit their family or taking care of their kids. Next slide. Thank you, Laura. The purpose of the minimum wage is to begin and to process and to achieve the decent work for domestic workers. To eventually emerge from a poverty wages, the minimum wage should enable domestic workers to enjoy a decent standard of in a living conditions, because this is not currently happening in all African countries, and this is a reality on the ground. The bargaining power of trade union has been modified several times since the independence of Namibia in 1990. Power is more recently defined by the Labor Act of Namibia. We're still facing challenges at the same moment while the minimum wage is still in in place. The Labor Act and regulations conditions of employment in Namibia are having a contract of employment, as I stated earlier, which is in writing. Most of the domestic workers currently, as I'm speaking now, they don't have this standard of employment contract. They are just working on a viable conditions. Domestic Workers Act, the Domestic Workers Department of Labor has made a law which regulated employment in the domestic worker sector. The sectorial determination for the domestic worker sector, employers. Oh, shit. Laura.
It's here. We can hear you, we can see you.
I think maybe you can share on my behalf because my network is stable and my laptop battery is very low. And where I am, I do not have access to electricity because I need to, in a few hours time, I need to take a flight to Cape Town.
Okay, Nelly, just we have left the explanation of the urban and non-urban areas as stipulated by the Domestic Workers Act.
I still have 10%. Maybe we can go through so that at least I can be able to share that one.
Yes, please.
Okay. The Department of Labor, the Domestic Workers Act, the open areas are classified as areas where one of minimum wage apply. None of the open areas in B areas with a different minimum wage. This minimum wage does not exist only for those who are in the open area, but those who are also in the open area, they also included in this minimum wage. But on a certain way, we are facing challenges with those who are working at the urban area because domestic workers, the majority of them, they are working for their families. And these families, they are more ignorant. They feel like these domestic workers are working for them. They are eating their food, they are living with them. So they don't need to pay them the minimum wage. So this is a current situation on the ground. But unfortunately, we were having a meeting with Minister of Labor, the advisor to the minister. So we are going to have a very good collaboration where we're going to do some more awareness campaigns taking place and talking to the domestic workers so that at least whenever the awareness campaign is happening on the level of the Ministry of Labor and Job Creation, the domestic workers trade union will be involved in these matters, including the national organizer of the union and the national executive members as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nelly, and thank you for sticking through despite the electricity problems that you are encountering. First and foremost, congratulations on elevating the minimum wage level in Namibia. This is a big step towards the right direction. It is a step that was also previously taken by Argentina, by South Africa. There are a lot of intersections of how domestic workers have been going through this fight, and a lot of similar milestones that you have achieved, also similar challenges that require collective bargaining. You have told us the difficulties of employers dismissing workers that demand the minimum wage and opting for people who would work underpaid. You have also mentioned differences in minimum wage between urban and rural areas. Some countries also have sectoral minimum wages. All of these are conversations we are embarking on as we contemplate what does it mean to reward domestic workers for their time, for their skills, for their labor, for all the works that they do. And this definitely requires representation and decision-making spaces. On representation, we have our speaker, Grace Papa, that will be talking to us about what does it mean to represent domestic workers from a perspective rooted in a European care strategy that was recently announced to include domestic workers as part of the care agenda. Grace Papa is the EFAT political secretary in charge of the domestic work sector, gender equality and diversity. In the past, she served as the regional secretary at the Belgian trade union, ACV-CST, Food and Services. She was also in charge of domestic workers and as well as an executive committee member of IDWF. Welcome, Grace. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Hula. Do you hear me all? Okay, perfect.
Yes.
So I'm not going to present myself because you did very well. So I just want to say good afternoon, good morning to everybody. I am really, really honored and appreciative of hearing you all this afternoon, and also of this responsibility that I had to do closing remarks. And I hope I will be comprehensive enough and will do as good as my previous colleagues that were very, very interesting intervention and very inspiring. So I would like to start by saying that it is a very, very important topic. I think it's also a very necessary topic to discuss within IDWF, but maybe also it could be also the most difficult topic for all of us, because in Europe and maybe also in other regions, there is a lack of clear common definition that exists around the care and what is care in the domestic work world. And we see that very clearly in Europe because we have, of course, a ILO convention that is in some countries ratified and in some aren't. In some others, there is a ratification, but no implementation because there is no political will to do so. Maybe there is political will, but not financial means because of the definition, because there is a difficulty to have a common definition on what is domestic work. And we still struggle in Europe to recognize domestic work as work, let alone recognizing domestic work as care work, because this has a clear meaning. And recognizing domestic work as essential work is already a big challenge, but recognizing domestic work as care work seems to be even big challenge for Europe, because recognizing them means also that governments will have to invest and reshape the care provision entirely. This means that it's very, very costly and also very, very political. And so coming back to the European care strategy, the European Union, so 27 countries in Europe that are organized under the European Commission, announced that they were going to launch their European care strategy this year in September. So they were going to, this is not a legislative tool, but it is a strategy that is supposed to give some guidelines to European member states in organizing or maybe providing, defining the provision, the access and the affordability of care in each and every European country. And so ahead of this launch, we as trade union, of course, and also with the employers, I must say, we worked very hard together with our allies within the European Parliament to trying to make sure that one, the care strategy in terms of affordability and accessibility, we will take both informal care, but also unpaid care and home care, into consideration in that strategy, and that each and every care receivers get to choose whether or not they can have a caregiver at home. Second one, our demand was to recognize the rights of domestic workers in the care strategy, to recognize these workers and to value domestic workers, but also by implementing, ratifying and implementing ILO Convention 189, but also ILO Convention 190. And the third demand that we're trying to include in this strategy is to consistently integrate migrants, domestic workers, both documented and undocumented, into the strategy, as they both provide and need care services in Europe. So, like I said, with the social partners and with the trade unions and with the workers, we're trying to work on with the parliament, making sure that at least they will have our advocacies, and that they will take these 3 points into consideration in this care strategy. And so the Commission launched the strategy in September, and we were extremely disappointed. The strategy is a document that I will share with you in the chat later on, or maybe via email, but in the 67 pages of this European care strategy, I think domestic workers are mentioned only twice. And so this is a really clear signal for us, because it means that the European Commission does not recognize domestic work as part of the care workforce in Europe. And this is really frightening, because the second thing we have also seen is through the whole document, they cannot avoid speaking about home care, but they do their very best not mentioning domestic workers. In all other ways, but not domestic workers. And so this is really clear that the reason for that is affordability. And the Commission is really aware of domestic workers, both informal but also unpaid domestic work is filling the gap actually of what they want to afford in Europe. And so this is really, really difficult for each and every one of us. Although the Commission at one moment in this care strategy, they mentioned that they do a call to ratify and implement ILO Convention 189. This is really nothing really it's not something that the European countries should enforce. It's just a call, by the way, what should be done, but it's not a strong recommendation or a strong guidelines that European member states should do. So of course, we are trying to work on that. We are trying to make sure that in the future they are integrated, and we are trying within the discussion, interinstitutional discussion, what they call between the Parliament, the Commission and the Council, we're trying to make sure that these are modified and that we can have a better tool in the future that includes domestic workers. But I think that I come back to the definition. I think we also need a clear definition, even for ourselves as trade union. I mean, in Europe, the situation is so diverse. I mean, if you cannot compare the day life of one domestic worker to another, I mean, the task is so difficult. ILO Convention is so clear. It's the place of work that defines domestic work. Like a gardener could be a domestic work, but also a direct caregiver could be a domestic work. Someone that is doing the household to a family that is not in care need, is that care? That are a question that needs to be addressed. Some say yes, some say no. Some countries have specific schemes for domestic workers that separate completely the care and the non-care. Some and when there is no scheme, we see in Europe that most domestic workers are actually providing both type of services, care and non-care, in an intertwined manner. They would clean the houses in the morning, in the afternoon take care of the kids, at evening take care of the elderly. And this is why it is so complicated for trade unions to have a clearer message, even though we try to integrate them, even though we try to make sure that their rights are respected and recognized and valued. I think it is also very difficult not having a clear common definition, or at least some clear common principles. And I think it will be a very difficult task for IDWF to do so, but I'm really positive that we will manage to have these discussions within IDWF and that we will find at least common principle that we can use in the countries, use in the regions, use for each and every domestic worker to make sure that they are recognized, valued, and professionalized. I thank you so much, and I wish you a beautiful day.
Thank you, Grace, so much. We're seeing also applause around the room for this intervention. Funny how the European Union actually promoted this development plan as inclusive of domestic workers when you mentioned that it is because they mentioned the word twice in a 67-page. That is not enough. So we are here today trying to define the parameters of how domestic workers are engaged in the care economy and what would be their lobbying strategies. We will open a Q&A session for about 10 minutes. I see two hands, one from Hira, one from Wang Sapu. So if you have a question, an opinion, something to share, please make that known. Maybe drop it in the box, in the chat box. Okay, I see one question here. Okay, so that's a thank you, not a question. Please use this opportunity to share your experiences. I'm sure that there must be some questions, opinions, ideas. Maybe some of you who are also trade unionists and domestic workers have found few solutions for the challenges that were described in this panel. I will give you a moment to think about that. Oh, we already have Carmen. Carmen, go ahead.
No, más que nada, quiero hacer un comentario.
More than anything, I'd like to make a remark. I want to share my experience. As you very well said, Rula, many countries can exchange ideas about how to have a recognition of care. Today, we started a federal campaign in Argentina about care work issues, where the inclusion of domestic workers regarding, paternity and maternity leave, because, men should have this kind of leave to help the woman worker when it's time for a baby to be born, and the importance that daycare centers have, where domestic workers can have access to having a daycare center for their children. And the important thing is that they're able to access this, right? Because as we said, domestic workers cannot pay a salary to another domestic worker or care worker to do the unpaid work that the workers should do at home. So I think we need to leave or to bring hope to all the domestic workers around the world, because even though these achievements are slow, I think that a small right that we obtain in every single one of our countries becomes super important. And then another thing that is super important when we have an amendment of a law or when we have a national bill passed in our countries, I think that it is important to categorize the work depending on the activities performed by the workers, so that we can award a higher salary to certain work. Because as Grace said before, workers have to do everything, and that can't be. That is not right. They do everything, and there's no differentiation within their salaries. They clean, they take care of children, they take care of the elderly. And so even some activities that require qualifications. And so we need to start thinking that for every bill that is presented has a categorization. In Argentina, we have 5 categories of domestic workers that have a different salary, differentiating the kind of work they do and the kind of responsibility that they have. And that's important, but there's something even more important, and that is that if a worker has two tasks to perform in the household, then she is entitled to the higher salary. And this has to do particularly with elderly care, because sometimes a domestic worker has to do the cleaning, prepare food, and take care of an elderly person or a child even. So this is important. We can do it. Each country will have their time. Each country will have its progress, slowly but surely. But all the rights, all protection is significant and important. And this exchange of experiences that we have here regarding care is of utmost importance. So that's what I wanted to add.
Thank you, Carmen. Also, I would like to share the three comments that have been like shared on the Q&A, just if anybody would like to pick up on them. First, we had Antonia agreeing with Grace about the definition of what constitutes domestic work, that it happens within the household, and the legal definitions in the international standard are clear. There are some differentiations of local or national legal contexts that we are trying to navigate. Another question we have here is from Alexis de Simone about what kind of support would be helpful from the broader labor movement or allied movements to domestic workers, so we can ensure the representation within the care economy, so that we can contribute to the shaping of the solutions. A question also to Hermawita that says the person is sharing that they felt very touched by the experience of migration that she has shared, and they would like to know whether domestic workers face similar challenges and conditions in their home countries when they are employed locally and not internationally. Whomever would like to take these. There is one more from an anonymous attendee. Okay, so in many countries, most of domestic workers are migrants, while the patient or employer family are local citizens. What do you think would be the difficulty to address this issue to the table? So the difference between citizenship and non-citizenship, the uneven power dynamic in that relationship of employment. So just to quickly also tell you how we will move forward after this, we will make 3 asks for you to contribute and continue sharing your stories online before we hand it over to Elizabeth to close. So 3 questions. Anybody would like to pick up on those? Go ahead.
No, bueno, yo creo que hay dos temas
I
sumamente importantes.
believe there are 2 very important topics regarding migration, and that is that it also depends on each country, right? But in each one of our countries, there is a percentage of domestic workers who are migrants, and it's up to each country, and it's up to the migration laws of each country. That's very, very important. And so when I talk about rules and regulations and the implementation of Convention 189, there should be no part in the world that has a difference between migrant workers, and a national domestic worker, because both do the same thing. Both are human beings, both have the same human rights, and they have the rights to have a decent life. The migrants don't leave their countries just because they want to. Migrants leave their countries to improve their life conditions, to improve their family situation. And migrants should not suffer from all the hostilities and all the suffering that they do. And so even though migrant domestic workers suffer from more discrimination and suffer more problems, national domestic workers also suffer from domestic violence, physical violence, psychological violence sometimes, and of course work violence, which is the non-recognition and non-registration, right? And so even though they share some very difficult situations, both nationals and migrants, I mean, migrants, of course, suffer a bit more because they are not recognized, or because abuses are committed because they're just migrants, right? And sometimes their status is not very well defined. And so that's a problem. It is very important to be able to coordinate, and this is in connection with Alexis's question, if I answered it correctly. I think we need to fight for a coordination with all sectors, the state, civil organizations, civilian organizations, all the sectors that provide support and continue supporting us within the federation, but mainly the unity that we have within our federation worldwide, because the support of one region to another is also extremely important. We have achieved a lot within our federation when we supported different colleagues from different countries to be able to channel or to obtain ratifications, laws, etc. So we need to continue working on Convention 190 so that it is ratified. Conventions 189 and 190 go hand in hand. And I think it's of utmost importance to continue fighting for unity, because that's the way, that's the path that we should undertake. And let's continue strengthening us so that we can see 2024 reaching us, or we can reach the ILO with the notion of care work, because we cannot let others violate our rights. The struggle is big when we need to include Convention 189, or we need to include care work within domestic work in any notion. But in any case, that is not an impediment for us. We are going to continue fighting, and we're going to be able to achieve that definition, that notion, including us in the care economy, like any other sector.
Thank you, Carmen. We've also had some experiences shared from Argentina, from Peru, from Paraguay about the current situation when it comes to care. No matter how big the struggle is, domestic workers are in different facets of it. They are givers of care, they should be receivers of care. It might look like a very comprehensive and immense task to do, but this is not a novelty for our movements. They have accomplished so much and continue to do so. We would like to ask you, before giving the floor to Elizabeth, to continue this conversation online by doing three things. So the three things, if you can put them up online, Matt, is to share one learning by tweeting at us on Twitter, like one takeaway from today's session, be it a question, an opinion, all of the things that you have shared with us today, to make some noise around the issue. The second one is to get in touch. Tell us, what is your government or your organization doing to invest in care? Are domestic workers included in their plan? Let us know. Be our eyes throughout the world, where you can share with us those updates. And finally, amplify our voice, take away some of these powerful interventions that have been shared with us here today, and bring them to your local governance. Thank you so much. Now I give the floor to our General Secretary, Elizabeth Tang, for the final words.
Hello. Thank you very much. It is very, very exciting, and it's also a great learning opportunity to listen to each one of you about the situation, and also how you experience and what do you think about domestic workers as care workers, being recognized, being represented, enjoying redistribution in your countries. And obviously, there are not many good, happy results to hear. Actually, we are, really depressed to hear that domestic workers' rights, basic rights, are so bluntly denied in everywhere. Be migrant domestic workers, especially as we have heard. So definitely, I agree very much to our last speaker, Grace, when she talked about representation, that our challenge as leaders of the IDWF is to mobilize all the domestic workers, all our members, to establish a clear common definition of care work, that domestic workers are a major workforce in the care work, and that our need for care and also our need for protection as care workers must be recognized and must be protected. So there is a lot to be done, and as future steps, we will continue to work with you, each one of our affiliates in different parts of the world, to see where the IDWF will be able to support you to intervene in government policies. First, we have to push governments to develop and to implement care policies. If government have no policy on care, or they are not going to do it, there is nothing much we can do on the ground. So first, we must move governments. We must work with all the other trade unions, all the other allies, to push our governments to implement care policies, because we need care protections, we need care services as any other workers, and so many of people in the community need protection, comprehensive care policies, protection. So we have to move our government to do this. And number two, when governments start doing this, crafting their policies, implementing their policies, domestic workers must be recognized, must be involved in the process. And that is this much, that we have to do. Earlier, we talked about there is now mapping research starting in Asia, and we will continue to do this not only in Asia, but in all the other regions, to identify where are the best places we can start mobilizing and to push our governments to develop and to implement care policies, and to include domestic workers in those processes. We will continue to amplify domestic workers' voice through the different alliances on care that IDWF is part of. We are working with the trade unions, the International Trade Union Confederation, the ITUC, the UNI, Union Network International, PSI, the Public Service International, WIGO. We work with all these international workers, trade unions, to push for care policies everywhere, and we are a part of that network. We are also part of the Global Alliance for Care. In this network, we work with governments also, although most of the governments are in Latin America, but nevertheless, this is the starting point, and we hope more and more governments will join this network. And we also work with the ILO, with the UN Women. We also work with Ford Foundation, other funders in this network to push the common agenda. Carmen talk about the ILO. The ILO also has care economy high on the agenda. In 2024, at the International Labour Conference, is going to be a big topic for discussion. And the IDWF, we will make sure that our voice will be loud and will be strong by 2024. So a lot to do from now. We have 2 years to build our power around that, and the IDWF will be leading and supporting all of you, our affiliates everywhere. And finally, I want to take this opportunity, that we are all together, to introduce you the IDWF new website. This is a beautiful website. We hope you like it. It is better because it is easier to use. We provide this space so that we can all find information, we can read stories, we share stories, not just, you know, when we are meeting at a webinar like this, but also through the website. And this is new, so if you have any comments, suggestions, just let us know. We will improve it, we will continue to improve it so that it will be something, you know, always there for us to share and learn. So thank you, each one of you, and thank you all the interpreters, all the speakers, that you are wonderful, and we have this great learning, sharing experience. So have a good day, and thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Just requesting that we stay for 1 more minute to take a collective picture as per our tradition. So please open your cameras, those of you who can, so we can commemorate this moment. Lovely to see you, Nelly, that you're online again. Great to have you back. So show us those beautiful faces.
I joined from my phone now.
Wonderful. Thank you. This is it. So bye.